Welcome to Real Talk, a DCF podcast on well-being. This is a partnership between the Academy for Workforce Development and the Office of Organizational Development. My name is Tracy Davis, and I'm the Director for the Academy for Workforce Development, and I'm joined here today by my co-host, Lenisa Mathew. Lenisa, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, thanks, Tracy, so much. So I am the Director of Organizational Development here at DCF, and so excited to be able to continue our series and excited to have Nicole here today. So
perfect. So our series today, our third series actually, is on compassion fatigue. And we are joined today by Nicole McKelvey Walsh. And I'll turn it over to her so that she can introduce herself to those of you who are listening.
Good morning, ladies. Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Nicole McKelvey, and I'm a Behavioral Health Clinical Manager with DCF.
Nice to have you
here. How long have you been at DCF, Nicole?
Well, I've been in the field of child welfare for 28 years, both in the public and private sector.
Awesome. So great to have you here.
Thank you.
So she brings a wealth of experience with her, and we are happy to delve into this topic of compassion fatigue. So why don't we get started? As you know, this particular venture was a request from the staff that took the training survey back in April. Everyone wanted to hear or understand a little bit more about burnout and well-being, and so we answered those calls, and we are starting this project in order to give staff a different format for learning and a different way of ingesting the information, and hopefully it will be useful for them. So, Nicole, can you take a few minutes and define for us what compassion fatigue is and how it's different from burnout and vicarious trauma?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. That's a great question. So burnout is really the cumulative stress, the frustration caused by the workforce challenges. So what I mean by that is long shifts, heavy workload, unrealistic paperwork. And burnout is something that can happen in many different professions. However, it's really the vicarious trauma and the compassion fatigue that is specific to us in the helping profession. Vicarious trauma, when I think about vicarious trauma, the best way to think about that is the transformation of our worldview. And that is really due to the cumulative exposure to the traumatic events and the traumatic stories that we hear over and over again. And so we were talking a little bit before that issue, that idea of worldview. And the example, I'm going to give you a personal example from my own life, is many years ago, my sister was telling me how excited she was that my niece was going to be going to preschool on a school bus. And my immediate reaction, without even thinking, it was just an automatic response, was, you can't let her go on a school bus. School buses are dangerous. And that's my distorted worldview after being in this field. And so my niece happened to be in the room, and she started crying, and she said, but I want to go on a school bus. And it was at that moment that I stopped and said, yes, of course. School buses to normal people are not inherently dangerous places. But when you're in this field for a long time and you have seen what it is that we see. So that's what I mean by the distortion of the worldview. Mm-hmm. And the compassion fatigue is really, that refers to the profound emotional and physical erosion that takes place when a helper is unable to refuel and regenerate. And over time, this erosion begins to diminish our ability to empathize. And so our lack of empathy, that's where compassion fatigue, it is as it sounds.
Mm-hmm. So good.
Wow. That's when you explain it in that way, for me, and I don't know about for you, Lenisa, it really does resonate, because I think we all have those examples of things that we may not have allowed our children to do because of what we've seen being out in the field for so very long. Sleepovers.
Absolutely.
That is one area. When my son started, preschool, elementary school, can I sleep over so-and-so's house? And I'd say, I don't really know those individuals. You can have them come here, though. That's right. They can sleep at our house. But that is based on what we've been exposed to. And so how do you move beyond that? How do you move past that?
Well, I think the first step is awareness, right? We need to know what are these signs of compassion fatigue. And I would break it up into emotionally, angry, irritable, a sense of hopelessness. If you don't know how you're doing emotionally, ask the people you live with, right? Physical, headaches, stomach aches, sleeping issues. Cognitively, so difficulty concentrating. And then I think this is one that DCF workers, right, all of us, we're known for this one, self-blame. If only I were a better social worker, if only I worked harder, if only I tried more. And then behaviorally, let's be real here. Substance use, right? Maybe too many glasses of wine, right? And chronic lateness. And what I mean by lateness is just you can't get yourself organized. You can't get yourself together. And also lack of joy. That's a hard one, right? You think, oh my God, lack of joy. And it also takes a hard look in the mirror. Nobody who wants to raise their hand and say, I have a lack of joy. But, ask your family, ask the people you live with.
What I love about this too, Nicole, is that you're helping give language, right? You talked about the awareness. And sometimes it's that we're always on the go, and there's no time to stop to be able to identify these great key points, like Tracy said. Like we all can absolutely connect to those different pieces. And I love that you're providing language. 'Cause I feel like awareness, the more we know, we call it out, we speak it, the more we can address it and figure out a way around it, which I think is fantastic.
Absolutely.
So, Nicole, from your perspective, let me ask you this. What role do you believe the pandemic has played in the increase in compassion fatigue?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Isolation, right? That's immediately come to mind. During the height of the pandemic, isolated, decreased sense of community. And I was thinking about this a lot. It was really the altering of our daily routines, right? And the lack of access to social networks. The pandemic brought about so much grief and loss, right? We lost time, we lost people, we lost relationships. And even now, though so many of the pandemic restrictions have really changed, many of us are still really working from home. We're spending a significant amount of time at our home. And there's a loss of that organic support, right? So what I'm really specifically thinking about is the support we get from our coworkers. And my example is our morning routines, right? So in the morning, I'd come in and maybe I'd have a nice conversation with the person I parked next to in the parking lot. I think about getting my coffee at the office in the morning. There were always so many people in the break room. And I could see, hey, Lenisa, I'm seeing you today, and I don't know, there's just something not quite right. So maybe at lunchtime, I'd stop by your office and I'd say, hey, I saw you getting coffee this morning. Everything okay? Just checking in. Yeah. We don't have that anymore. And so I think because that's not organically happening, what needs to happen is we have to be more intentional.
Oh, I love that.
And more purposeful about supporting each other and checking in.
Yeah, that's so great.
So what might that look like? We had our second podcast series that talked about connectedness through the Willimantic office. But Nicole, you mentioned it has to be intentional. So do you have any examples of what that might look like for staff?
One thing I may add, Nicole, is an idea that actually popped in my head. Just to jump in quickly, is the idea of one thing that the Willimantic team actually shared in previous meetings was that sometimes they get everybody on Microsoft teams, and everybody has to be on the chat, and everybody has to say good morning to one another. And sort of this, when you talk about intentionality, that's what immediately came into my mind, which is a great question about examples. What does that look like? Because in a hybrid world, right, the truth is we're meeting people where they're at, which is important, but then it's also the opportunity to recraft and design something that meets everybody's needs.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the role of leaders and managers, right? So as leaders and managers, supervisors of the agency, number one, it's important that we understand the psychological impact, right? The psychological, the spiritual impact of our work. We need to really be alert to how our staff are functioning, checking in, as you were just saying, staying positive, knowing what the resources are, talking about compassion fatigue and unit meetings. I think setting a good example, right? Because if I'm not taking care of myself, my staff are watching me, right? And so we also have to set the good example. I also think it's really important to connect to why are we here, right? So all of us had a unique journey in coming to the department, but all of our stories have the same consistent theme, right? That we have a desire to help children and families. We want to help make their lives better. And so connecting to the roots of why we came to this profession and knowing that all of us want to leave the Department of Children and Families in a better place than we found it. So that larger mission.
Nice.
That's lovely. In your opinion, Nicole, do you believe that when people do become desensitized to the work, is this a form of compassion fatigue, in your opinion?
Yeah, right. We talked about this a little bit earlier, right? It's the spiritual, the emotional, the physical erosion, which really does profoundly impact our ability to continue to empathize with our clients. And really, this is a form of self-protection, right? Because when we can't tolerate it anymore, we have to protect ourselves in some way. And so the byproduct of that is we begin to empathize less.
So true. So good. And sometimes I think to that point, to be honest, is that you don't realize it. Because sometimes I think people always trying to do their best, the best intentions for the majority of the time, right? But then when there's a go, you don't even realize for yourself, which leads me back to what you said about awareness. When you can start identifying those triggers in yourself to be like, hey, I need a 5-minute break, or I need to tap out, or I'm going to come back in. Look, when we talk about real talk, right? How do we then navigate it through our everyday lives to make it something that's benefiting us and those around us too?
Absolutely.
So, we come to this work with our authentic self all the time. And in order not to do that, and it's easy to lose it, because sometimes the work becomes rote. Sometimes you allow your own, whatever issues you might be dealing with at home or at work, they all blend together. How do you suggest that people build resilience to maintain their authentic self here?
Sure. So, I really want to start this part of the conversation about giving credit where credit is due. And I want to appreciate and not acquire the important work of Dr. Tama Bryant. And many of the DCF audience will know who I'm talking about. There was recently a trauma conference, and Dr. Tama Bryant was one of the keynote speakers. And oh my gosh, what an amazing and incredible brilliant woman. She's the president-elect of the American Psychological Association. She's a minister and an acclaimed author, right? So she brings a lot to the table. Her book, and we can talk a little bit about this too at the end, her book is called Homecoming. And what she talks about in that book is how to overcome trauma and reclaim your authentic self. And I think that we need to learn how to lean in to our vulnerability and not turn away from the emotional pain that's caused by our work. Sometimes this really requires us to take a good hard look in the mirror and to be honest with ourselves and recognize that we're not superhumans. Yeah, and it sort of goes back to that idea of self-blame, right? If only I were a better social worker. I don't know why DCF attracts you. How does DCF find all of us, right? So, people that are so hard on themselves and always wanting to be the perfectionist. So I think you have that hard look in the mirror and you can't be a superhuman and do it all, and then rely on your team, right? Who's on your team?
It also makes me think when you said that so beautifully is that the small wins, right? Like sometimes those get overlooked because, to your point, this way that with the pressures sometimes of I didn't achieve X, Y, or Z, but the flip side of it is, what did you achieve? Mm-hmm. What were you able to do? Absolutely. How did you get there? And to your point, I love how you beautifully said that, because that's such real talk. In my head, I'm thinking, how do we help start changing the game of that? How do we help rewriting that narrative for ourselves that then impact our children and families at the end of the day?
Absolutely.
You spoke about this a little bit, but could you speak perhaps a little bit more about the resources or activities that our staff could use to assist them to overcome compassion fatigue?
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think about accessible resources for everyone, right? Because we're so on the go, and I think we need a variety of options in our toolkit, right? So I'm thinking specifically about the work of Brene Brown, right? Many people will know her, right? She refers to herself as a researcher and a storyteller. I just love that idea of being a storyteller. And she talks about the power of vulnerability and authenticity. Great books. She has a wonderful book called Dare to Lead.
Yes.
Right? Oh my God, Dare to Lead. Good. And then another one, Atlas of the Heart.
Yes.
She has wonderful podcasts and YouTube videos. And of course, we were just talking a moment ago about the tremendous work of Dr. Tama Bryant. She also has YouTube videos and a podcast, but her book is entitled Homecoming: Overcome Fear and Trauma to Reclaim Your Whole Authentic Self. Isn't that fantastic, awesome. Right? Love that. Clinical psychologist and a minister, right? Mm-hmm. So for so many of our staff who, I had sent Tracy a video of Dr. Bryant, and so for so many of our staff, their first call when they're in distress would be to their minister, not their therapist. And so Dr. Bryant comes to the work from that perspective. I also have a great workbook. It's called the Compassion Fatigue Workbook. It has creative tools for transforming trauma, fatigue, compassion fatigue. It's got great little quizzes, very accessible workbook, easy to use. And it's really a wonderful tool for our supervisors and our managers. Think about doing one of these exercises in a unit meeting or a work group meeting. And I think it's important that we talk about this, right? Lenisa, you just said this a minute ago. If we're not willing to be courageous ourselves, how can we expect anybody else to? Yeah. So we have to admit to ourselves what's happening and how overwhelming the job could be, and that we really need to take care. So let's talk about it at the next unit meeting.
That's lovely. Nice. So one thing I really appreciate, Nicole, that you had shared is, with the workbook about compassion fatigue, I feel like it's a beautiful way to provide, within our safe and sound culture, ways in which our staff can be able to apply the work in their everyday lives, right? And we talked about this, and, you said so beautifully, which I'm going to ask you to repeat again for me, is, off air, you had shared something so beautiful that I wanted to capture in this moment of, what that looks like and how it benefits this kind of work within Safe and Sound.
Yeah, I think it's really important to make sure that we're giving permission to say, I'm not okay today.
Yes.
And that, that's a very profound and hard thing to say for the DCF people that I know and love, is today's the day where all is not well. And I need to say that. And that is a big risk to say in front of your supervisor, right? Or your manager, because we all strive to be the very best. And we have to give each other the permission to say, today's not the day. Yes. I need something else today.
What I love about that is also, you don't have to be a certain seat not to say that. You can be a manager. You can be at that top level to wherever you sit bottom. And I love that because it's right, giving people permission to be able to speak their truth, which is the whole point of Safe and Sound in general. Because then you take that with your authentic self that you're talking about to be able to be there, but then not have consequences, but perhaps opportunities to learn, grow together. There's still accountability, right? But there's a balance of it all versus being able to work together collaboratively towards that mission. I love that this is a resource in which how do we bring it to light as another way to live out. So I appreciate you bringing this to the table today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. You definitely gave us quite a bit to think about. Quite a lot to reflect on, I would say, that helps us to maybe even change our view, our worldview. And it's definitely a great complement to the other sessions that we've heard about. And so Lenisa and I just thank you so much, Nicole, for being here with us, for taking the time to come and talk to us and to talk to our DCF staff. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed being here with you ladies today. Thanks so much.
So incredible.